Every Memorial Day we hosted a barbecue. It was supposed to be a day for family. Both of our families. We had a big green yard, a new patio set, and a grill my husband Mark was ridiculously proud of. It was the perfect setup for making happy memories. That's what I told myself. Anyway, this year was different. My family wasn't here. My mom, Martha, was recovering from a nasty fall, and my brother David was staying with her to help out. It was just Mark's side of the family, his mom, Patricia, his dad, Robert, and his sister, Jessica. I spent the whole afternoon on my feet. I refilled glasses with iced tea before they were empty. I made sure the cooler was stocked with the beer Robert liked. I flipped burgers, turning each one at the exact right moment so they were juicy, but not pink. I smiled when Patricia told me the lawn looked a little patchy in the corner. I smiled when Jessica pointed out a smudge on one of the wine glasses. I was the perfect hostess in our perfect house with its perfectly manicured lawn. I did everything right. Late in the afternoon, I finally took a break. I brought a plate of food over to a lawn chair and sat down, ready to take my first real bite of the day. The sun was warm on my skin. The low hum of conversation was a steady, gentle noise. For a second, I almost felt relaxed. That's when I heard it. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile on her face. She looked at Mark, then around the yard, and let out a long, happy sigh. "You know," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "it just feels so peaceful this year. No chaos. No drama. To did." She meant my family. She meant my mom's booming laugh that filled every room she was in. She meant my brother David's stupid, hilarious jokes that always made me cry with laughter. She meant the lively, loud, loving energy they brought with them everywhere they went. To Jessica, that was chaos. It was drama. I waited for Mark to defend them, to say something like, "We miss them, though." Or even just a simple, "Yeah, but it's not the same without them." He could have said anything. Instead, he just chuckled. It was a soft, low sound, an agreement. He reached over and squeezed her arm affectionately. "I know what you mean," he said. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The burger suddenly tasted like ash. I looked at my husband, the man I had built this life with. As he smiled at his sister, they were sharing a moment of peace. A peace that was only possible because a piece of my heart wasn't there. That was it. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't really part of their family. I was just the person who hosted the party, the one who grilled the burgers and cleaned the smudged glasses. I was a convenient, smiling fixture in my own home. And my absence, the absence of everyone I loved, was the secret ingredient to their perfect day. My heart didn't just sink. It cracked right down the middle. It wasn't always like this. I remember the day we first moved into that house. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in early spring. The air smelled like cut grass and fresh paint. We didn't have any furniture yet. Just boxes stacked against the walls and a bottle of cheap champagne we drank while sitting on the floor of the empty living room. I was so full of hope it felt like a balloon inside my chest. "We'll be so happy here, Sarah," Mark had said, kissing the top of my head. I believed him. In those first few months, the house was filled with life. My life. My family. I would call my mom, Martha, every single morning on my way to work. We didn't talk about anything important, really. Just the weather or a funny thing the dog did or what we were having for dinner. Her voice was the soundtrack to my mornings. It was familiar and comforting. A reminder of where I came from. My brother David would video chat me from his tiny apartment in the city. He'd prop his phone up on a stack of books and show me the ridiculous plant he was trying to keep alive, or the terrible painting he'd started. He'd make faces at me and I would laugh so hard I'd have to gasp for air. His humor was loud and a little weird, but it was my kind of loud. My kind of weird. When my mom came to visit, she'd take over the kitchen. She'd bring bags of groceries and cook all my favorite things from childhood. The whole house would smell like garlic and onions and roasting chicken. We'd play old music and sing off-key while we chopped vegetables. And she'd tell me stories about when I was little. The house felt warm. It felt alive. It felt like a home. I didn't notice the change at first. It was subtle. A quiet shift in the atmosphere, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. It started with my morning calls. One day, as I was laughing on the phone with my mom, Mark walked past and let out a deep, heavy sigh. "Do you have to be so loud, Sarah?" he asked later. "I could hear you all the way upstairs." I was trying to focus. I started taking the calls in my car in the driveway before I even came inside. I kept my voice down. I started laughing a little less. Then came my mom's visits. She came over one Saturday to help me plant a garden. We were in the backyard covered in dirt, laughing about how neither of us had a green thumb. Mark came out onto the porch. He didn't smile. "Mom, your car is blocking the driveway," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an accusation. "Oh, sorry. Honey, I'll move it," she said, her bright smile faltering for just a second. Later that night, Mark said, "It's just a little disruptive when your mom comes over. It feels like she takes over the whole house." Disruptive. My mother, with her home-cooked meals and her warm hugs, was disruptive. So, I started telling her I was busy on weekends. The visits became less frequent. The garden we planted never really grew. David was the next to go. He came over for dinner once and he told a joke. It was a long, rambling story that ended in a terrible pun. The kind that was so bad it was hilarious. I was in tears, laughing so hard my stomach hurt. Mark just sat there staring at his plate. He had a tight, polite smile on his face. After David left, Mark turned to me. "I don't get your brother's sense of humor," he said. "It's just a lot. Too loud. Too disruptive." too much. My family, the people who had shaped me, were being edited out of my life, one quiet complaint at a time. Mark never said, "Don't invite them over." He never said, "Stop talking to them." He was smarter than that. He just made me feel in 1,000 small ways that the people I loved did not belong in the life we were building. He made me feel like I had to choose. And I did. I chose peace. Or what I thought was peace. I chose him. By the next year, the house was silent. The morning calls were short and quiet. My mom rarely visited. My brother stopped telling me jokes because he knew it made Mark uncomfortable. The kitchen no longer smelled like my mother's cooking. There was no more off-key singing. The laughter was gone. The house was clean and orderly and quiet. So incredibly quiet. I learned to live small inside of it. I folded myself up into a neat, manageable shape that wouldn't be too loud, too disruptive, or too much. I thought that was the price of a happy marriage. I didn't realize I was paying with everything that made me who I was. The day of the barbecue started with a knot in my stomach. I woke up with it. A tight, anxious feeling that settled behind my ribs. I tried to ignore it as I chopped onions for the burger patties and mixed the ingredients for the coleslaw. Hosting was a performance and I knew my lines. Smile. Be gracious. Make sure everyone has a full drink. Mark's family arrived right on time, as they always did. Punctuality was a virtue, one of many they possessed that my own family apparently lacked. His mom, Patricia, walked in first, carrying a glass bowl covered in plastic wrap. She placed it on the kitchen counter with a thud. "I brought my potato salad," she announced as if she were bestowing a great gift upon us. It was the same potato salad she brought to every gathering. It was bland and watery, and no one ever touched it. But I always had to make room for it on the table. "Thank you, Patricia. That's so thoughtful," I said, my voice bright and fake. His sister Jessica followed close behind. She didn't bring anything. She drifted over to the kitchen island, her eyes scanning my preparations like a health inspector. She picked up a corner of the foil covering the deviled eggs I'd spent an hour making that morning. "Oh, you made deviled eggs again? Cute," she said. The word cute came out of her mouth like an insult. "They're not Mom's recipe." "Of course. But sure." I swallowed the hurt. It felt like a small, sharp stone going down my throat. "I hope you like them," I said, forcing a smile so wide it made my cheeks ache. I took Patricia's potato salad and moved my deviled eggs, my perfectly piped, paprika-dusted deviled eggs, to the back of the counter to make space. It felt like a metaphor for my entire marriage. The afternoon wore on in a series of these small paper cuts. Mark's dad, Robert, complained that the brand of beer I'd bought wasn't his usual. Mark laughed and promised to get the right kind next time, as if I were a new employee who'd made a rookie mistake. Patricia rearranged the napkins I'd set out, folding them into tight, disapproving little squares. Jessica critiqued the music I had playing softly in the background, calling it depressing. Through it all, I kept smiling. I moved through the party like a ghost in my own home. My only purpose was to serve and anticipate the needs of others. I refilled Robert's glass with water when he switched from beer. I complimented Patricia's untouched potato salad. I asked Jessica about her boring job and pretended to be interested in her answers. I was working so hard to be liked, to be accepted, to finally, after all these years, be considered one of them. It was exhausting. Finally, after everyone had eaten, after I'd cleared away most of the plates and wrapped up the leftovers, I made a plate for myself. It was the first thing I'd had a chance to eat all day. I found an empty chair in the corner of the patio and sat down. The burger was cold. The coleslaw was warm. I didn't care. I was just happy to be sitting down. That's when Jessica leaned toward Mark. She did it conspiratorially, lowering her voice just enough to make it seem like a secret, but keeping it loud enough for me to hear perfectly. It was a practiced, cruel art form. I have to say, Mark, she began, taking a delicate sip of her wine. It's just so much calmer without Sarah's side here. So peaceful. I watched my husband. His name is Mark. This is the man I promised to love for the rest of my life. I watched his face. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into a small smile. And then he laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was a soft private chuckle he shared with his sister. A little puff of air that said, "You're right. Our little secret. It's better this way." I looked down at my plate, at the cold hamburger patty and the limp salad. I saw my hands resting in my lap, my knuckles white from gripping the fork. Suddenly, I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't anything. The buzzing in my ears was so loud I couldn't hear the music or the birds or the sound of their quiet, peaceful conversation. I carefully, quietly set down my fork. I stood up, picked up my plate, and walked back into the kitchen. I scraped the food into the trash. That was the last meal I ever cooked for them. That was the last time I ever tried to earn my place at a table where I was never truly welcome. The silence in the house after they left was heavier than usual. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a dead quiet. The kind that presses in on you from all sides. I cleaned the kitchen on autopilot. I scrubbed dried ketchup off plates and loaded the dishwasher with a mechanical precision. Each clink of glass felt like a tiny explosion in the stillness. Mark was in the living room, the blue light of his phone illuminating his face in the dark. He hadn't offered to help. He never did. When the last dish was put away and the counters were wiped clean, I walked into the living room. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I knew I had to say something. The silence would eat me alive if I didn't. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest. "You heard what your sister said." It wasn't a question. Mark didn't look up from his phone. He just kept scrolling, his thumb moving in a steady, repetitive motion. "What about it?" he asked, his voice flat and uninterested. "She insulted my family in our home. And you laughed. You agreed with her. The words came out shaky, but I kept my voice level. I would not cry. I would not give him that. He finally sighed. That same tired sigh he used whenever I brought up something that inconvenienced him. He locked his phone and tossed it onto the couch beside him. He still didn't look at me. He stared at the blank television screen instead. Sarah, come on. She didn't mean anything by it. She meant every word, I said, stepping further into the room. She meant my mom and my brother are chaos. She meant it's better when they're not around. And you sat there, and you agreed with her. You made me feel like an outsider in my own home on a day I spent cooking and cleaning for your entire family. He finally turned his head to look at me. There was no apology in his eyes. No regret. There was just a deep, weary annoyance. It was the look of a man who felt he was being unfairly bothered. It is more peaceful, he said, his voice cold. Can you honestly say it's not? When your family is here, it's a circus. Your mom is loud. Your brother tells inappropriate jokes. They take over everything. It's exhausting. I don't want them here. Is that so terrible to want some peace and quiet in my own house? The word "my" hung in the air between us. It's our house. Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The trapped bird in my chest was beating its wings furiously. He looked at me then. A long, hard stare. His face was a mask of cold indifference. The man I married, the one who drank cheap champagne with me on an empty floor, was gone. A stranger was sitting in his place. I pay the mortgage. Sarah, he said flatly. There it was. The truth. Stripped bare of all the pretty lies we had told ourselves. It wasn't our house. It was his. I wasn't his partner. I was a tenant. My place here was conditional, dependent on my ability to be quiet, to be small, to not cause a disruption. My family, my love for them, my very identity. It was all just a circus he had to tolerate, and he was tired of buying the tickets. Something inside me didn't just crack. It shattered. It was a clean, silent break, like a pane of glass hit with a stone. It wasn't a hot, messy break born from anger. It was a cold, sharp, and perfectly clear break. In that single awful moment, I saw everything. I saw the years of quiet manipulations, the subtle criticisms, the slow and steady erosion of my world until the only thing left was his. He wasn't protecting our peace. He was protecting his control. The house. The marriage. Me. It all belonged to him. And he was reminding me of my place. I didn't say another word. I just turned around and walked out of the room, leaving him there with the blue glow of his phone and the heavy, dead silence of his house. The argument was over. It had been over before it even started. I woke up the next morning before the sun. The house was still dark, still wrapped in that suffocating quiet. The clarity from the night before hadn't faded. It was a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange, hollow calm. I knew exactly what I had to do. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark. His back was to me. A solid, unmoving wall in the dim light. I moved through the room with a quietness I had perfected over years of trying not to be a disturbance. I opened the closet door without a creak. I pulled a suitcase from the top shelf. I didn't pack much. There wasn't much that felt like mine anymore. I packed a few pairs of jeans, some sweaters, the clothes I wore when I felt most like myself. I packed my laptop and its charger. I went into the bathroom and gathered my toothbrush, my face wash, the simple things that belonged only to me. I left the expensive perfumes Mark had bought me. I left the jewelry he had given me for birthdays and anniversaries. They felt like props for a role I was no longer playing. On my nightstand was a small silver frame. It held a photo of my mom and me taken years ago at our family's cabin by the lake. We were both smiling. Genuine, unforced smiles. My mom had her arm around me, holding me tight. We looked so happy. We looked like we belonged together. I wrapped the frame in a t-shirt and placed it carefully in the middle of the suitcase. It was the most important thing I owned. When I was done, I zipped the bag and carried it downstairs. The house felt alien, like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The photos on the wall were of a smiling couple I didn't recognize. The furniture we had picked out together felt cold and impersonal. This wasn't a home. It was a stage, and I was walking off of it. In the kitchen, I pulled my car key from the hook by the door. Then, I took my house key off the ring. It felt strangely light in my hand. I looked at it for a long moment. The little piece of metal that was supposed to symbolize my place in this life. In this house, his house. I set it down on the smooth granite countertop right in the center of the island. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. The key was the note. It was the explanation. It was the end. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The drive to my mom's house felt like waking from a long, confusing dream. With every mile I put between myself and that silent house, the heavy weight on my chest seemed to lift inch by inch. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. It felt like the world was starting over. Maybe I was, too. I pulled into her driveway and just sat in the car for a minute, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I was afraid. Afraid of what I had done, of what came next. But underneath the fear was a feeling I hadn't felt in years. Relief. I got out, pulled my suitcase from the trunk, and walked up the familiar path to her front door. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. My mom was standing there in her bathrobe, her hair messy from sleep. She must have heard the car. She looked at me, then at the suitcase in my hand. Her eyes were full of a deep, knowing sadness. But there was no surprise, no judgment, no questions. She just held the door open wider. "I'll put the kettle on," she said, her voice soft and steady. I stepped inside, and she wrapped her arms around me. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, the way it always had. It smelled like safety. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I felt like I was home. The first few days at my mom's house were blurry. I slept more than I thought possible. A deep, heavy sleep that felt like my body was trying to heal itself from years of being tense. I moved around the small house in a daze, wrapped in a blanket, feeling like a ghost. My mom didn't push me to talk. She just kept my mug full of tea and made me toast, cutting it into triangles, just like she did when I was a kid. The simple act of being cared for without any strings attached felt so foreign it almost made me cry. The silence here was different from the silence in Mark's house. His silence was empty and cold, a void where life was supposed to be. My mom's silence was gentle and full. It was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall, the sound of her knitting needles clicking softly in the next room. It was a peaceful silence, a presence, not an absence. My brother David dropped by that first evening. He didn't call first. He just showed up, his arms full of white paper bags that smelled of ginger and soy sauce. He kicked the door shut behind him and dropped the bags on the kitchen table. "I brought the good stuff," he announced, pulling out containers of lo mein and General Tso's chicken. He didn't pepper me with questions. He didn't ask for every detail of what had happened. He didn't say, "I told you so," even though he'd never been Mark's biggest fan. He just looked at me, his eyes searching my face, and asked one simple question. "You okay?" I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen for the first time. I managed a small, watery smile. "Better here than there," I said. He nodded, and that was it. No lecture, no pity, no dramatic scene. He understood. He unpacked the food, grabbed some plates, and we ate sitting at the small kitchen table, just the three of us. He told a stupid joke about a penguin, and my mom groaned, and I laughed. A real laugh. It felt rusty, like a piece of machinery that hadn't been used in years. But it was there. For a few minutes, I forgot about the big, quiet house and the man with the cold eyes. I was just a daughter, a sister, home. The next morning, my Uncle John stopped by. John was my dad's younger brother, a man who had been a quiet, steady presence in my life since my father passed away. He wasn't a man of many words. He was built like an oak tree, solid, sturdy, and deeply rooted. He owned a large construction and development firm in town, Keystone Development, a business he'd built from the ground up with his own two hands. He was respected, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he was honest and fair. When John spoke, people listened. He came in, gave my mom a kiss on the cheek, and sat down at the kitchen table as if he'd been invited. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter and looked at me. His gaze was direct but kind. He had my dad's eyes. "Martha told me you're staying for a bit," he said, It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. Yeah, I am. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what Mark did or what I said. He was like David. He trusted that if I was here, I had a good reason. He sat in silence with us for a few minutes. A comforting, protective presence that filled the small kitchen. He wasn't here to solve my problems. He was just here to let me know I wasn't alone. After a while, he set his mug down on the table with a soft click. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, but serious. He asked one simple question. What's Mark's company called again? The question caught me off guard. Summit Construction. I said. Why? Uncle John didn't answer. He just gave a single slow nod. It was the kind of nod he gave when he'd finished looking at a set of blueprints and had already decided how the entire building would come together. It was a nod that meant a decision had been made. A plan was already in motion. He stood up, squeezed my shoulder gently, and said, "Good to see you, Sarah." Then he left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him get into his big pickup truck and drive away. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know what that single nod meant. But as I watched his truck disappear down the street, I felt a tiny seed of strength begin to sprout in the barren, hollowed out space inside my chest. My family was here. They believed in me, and they were quieter and stronger than Mark could ever imagine. A few days later, the quiet rhythm of my mom's house was broken by a phone call. I was in the living room, sorting through a box of old photos, trying to piece together the person I used to be. Uncle John was in the kitchen with my mom. He'd stopped by again, something he did often, but this time felt different. He was on his cell phone, his back to me, his voice a low, calm rumble. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his words cut through the quiet air of the house with absolute clarity. "No, the decision is final," he said. There was a pause. I could hear the faint, tiny sound of someone talking quickly, maybe pleading on the other end of the line. Uncle John waited patiently for them to finish. Then he spoke again, and his voice was as cool and solid as granite. "We won't move forward with Summit. Cancel the deal." He hung up. Just like that. No yelling. No emotion. Just a simple declarative statement that had the force of a wrecking ball. My hands froze over a picture of me at my 10th birthday party. Summit. Mark's company. I stood up and walked to the kitchen doorway. My mom was looking at John, her expression unreadable. John was looking out the window, his jaw set. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. John turned to face me. There was no apology in his eyes, only a fierce protective loyalty. "That was the Anderson project," he said. "The new commercial complex by the marina." I knew the project. Mark had been talking about it for months. It was his big break. The deal that was going to elevate his company to the next level. It was a massive $2 million contract. I had seen the blueprints spread out on our dining room table, a table I was no longer allowed to set for my own family. "You just canceled a $2 million contract," I said, the words feeling unreal in my mouth. "I did," he replied, his voice even. He took a sip of his coffee as calmly as if he'd just been discussing the weather. "Keystone Development has a reputation to maintain. We don't work with people who disrespect our own. The words settled over me like a warm, heavy blanket. For years, I had been trying to become one of them. Mark's family. I had twisted myself into knots, made myself small and quiet, all for a place at their table. I had forgotten that I was already one of my own. I already belonged somewhere. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share the video to help me grow better. That single phone call was the first domino. I didn't know it at the time, but Uncle John's firm was the cornerstone of dozens of projects in the region. Pulling his support from Summit Construction wasn't just the loss of one contract. It was a signal to everyone else. It was a vote of no confidence from the most respected man in the business. The fallout was fast, and it was brutal. By the next day, subcontractors who worked with both John and Mark started calling Mark, panicking. They couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of Keystone Development. Two of his best foremen quit, saying they'd been offered more stable positions elsewhere. An architect Mark relied on suddenly stopped returning his calls. My phone, which had been silent for days, started to buzz. The first text from Mark was just one word: "Sarah." I ignored it. An hour later, another one. "Did you talk to your uncle? The Anderson deal just fell through." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the instinct to smooth things over, to manage his feelings. Then I thought of him laughing with his sister. I thought of his cold, dismissive eyes. I thought of the words, "I pay the mortgage." I put the phone down, screen facing down, and didn't answer. By Friday, his company was in free fall. A key investor, a man who played golf with my uncle every Thursday, pulled his funding. A bank loan he'd been counting on was suddenly under review. Summit Construction, the company he had built by being charming and ruthless, was collapsing. He had built it to be a fortress, but he'd forgotten that no fortress can stand if the ground beneath it gives way. His texts became more frequent, more desperate. "Sarah, everything's falling apart. The bank is calling. What is going on? Please. Can we just talk? I don't understand. I need you. Please call me." I read each message with a strange sense of detachment. It felt like I was reading about a character in a book, a man I used to know. The panic in his words didn't touch me. The house he had bought, the company he had built, the life he had so carefully constructed, it was all his. The collapse was his, too. I sat on my mom's porch, a warm mug of tea in my hands, and watched the sunset. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't anxious about a phone call. I wasn't managing his mood. I was just quiet. And I was free. Within a week, the story of Summit Construction's sudden implosion was all over town. But it wasn't loud, ugly gossip. It spread the way things do in a small community. Quietly. Through nods and knowing glances and conversations over coffee. No one needed to be told the whole story. They just needed one fact. Keystone Development had cut all ties. In our town, that was enough. My Uncle John's word was better than any credit report. His disapproval was a quiet, professional death sentence. I saw the ripple effect from the safe harbor of my mother's home. It wasn't an act of revenge orchestrated in a war room. It was something more organic, more powerful. It was the simple, unstoppable consequence of a community closing ranks to protect one of its own. It was karma moving quietly on soft feet. Other business partners who had once courted Mark now distanced themselves. A supplier who had always given him favorable terms suddenly tightened his credit line, citing market uncertainty. A zoning variance he'd been expecting for a new subdivision was mysteriously delayed. Every door that had once swung open for him, charmed by his confidence and ambition, began to quietly click shut. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen while my mom was on the phone with my cousin, Emily. Emily worked as a real estate agent for the biggest firm in the county. Her voice was faint through the phone, but I could hear her clearly enough. "No. I know, Aunt Martha," Emily was saying. "He called me directly this morning. Pitched me on that new plot of land out by the old highway. He sounded desperate." There was a pause. I told him we weren't interested. I had to. After what John said, I heard my mom murmur something. Then Emily spoke again, her voice firm. I told him our firm has a new policy. I just made it up on the spot. I said, "We prefer to work with people who value family." He didn't know what to say to that. Emily laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Yeah, I guess not. Talk to you later, Aunt Martha." My mom hung up the phone and looked at me. She had a sad, weary smile on her face. "Emily sends her love," she said. He had spent years building walls to keep my family. So true that reading it felt like looking in a mirror. It was my story, Harper wrote with a fierce, protective clarity. She didn't paint me as a helpless victim. She portrayed me as a competent, loving professional who had been systematically devalued. The most powerful part of the article was the end. The planner, Harper wrote, faced with the undeniable proof that her love was conditional and her presence was disposable, made a choice. She did not scream. She did not fight. She did not beg. She simply resigned. She sent a polite, professional email and walked away, leaving the perfect world she had built to stand or fall on its own. Her story is not one of revenge. It is a quiet story of self-respect. It's a reminder that a woman's value is not determined by her utility to others, and that sometimes the most powerful thing to do is to refuse to be invisible. I finished reading with tears streaming down my face. Harper had taken my mess of shame and pain and turned it into something powerful and dignified. She had given my story a voice, a meaning beyond my own hurt. I scrolled down to the comments section, my finger trembling. There were hundreds of them, and they were still pouring in. A woman wrote, "This made me cry. I am the ghost planner for every holiday, every birthday, every single family event. Thank you for putting this into words." Another comment said, "To the planner, wherever you are, you're my hero. You did what so many of us only dream of doing." And another, "This should be required reading for every family that takes one person for granted. Thank you for showing what self-respect looks like. I'm sharing this with my sister and my mother and my daughter." On and on it went. Men and women from all over the country were sharing their own stories of feeling used, of being the designated family fixer, of being loved for what they did rather than for who they were. The article was going viral. My private humiliation had become a public anthem for the undervalued. For the first time, my story wasn't a source of shame. It wasn't a secret wound I had to hide. It was a spark. It connected me to thousands of people I would never meet. Sitting in that coffee shop thousands of miles from home, I had never felt less alone. Harper had given me my voice back, and that voice was now part of a chorus. I stayed in Hawaii for 2 weeks. It was the most peaceful, restorative 2 weeks of my life. I learned to surf badly. I hiked to waterfalls. I ate my weight in fish tacos. By the time I boarded the plane back to Nashville, I felt like a different person. The hole in my chest, the one that had been carved out by my family's neglect, had begun to fill with something new, a quiet, unshakable sense of my own worth. When I walked back into my apartment, it was exactly as I had left it. The swatches and samples from the party were still on my table. I looked at them, not with pain, but with a distant, clinical detachment. They felt like artifacts from another person's life. I unblocked my family's numbers, not because I wanted to talk to them, but because I knew I had to face the aftermath. The flood of notifications was immediate. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, texts. I listened to the voicemails first. My mom's were tearful and manipulative. "Elara, I don't know what we did to make you do this to us. Your father and I are just devastated. Savannah is a mess. You've ruined your brother's happiness. Please, just call me so we can fix this." She wasn't sorry for what they did. She was sorry for how my reaction made them look. My dad's messages were different. He tried to be stern, but it was laced with a new, unfamiliar desperation. "Elara, this has gone on long enough. We need to have a family meeting and sort this out like adults." He wanted to restore the old order, the one where I knew my place. Brittany had sent a text that was the epitome of a non-apology. "Hey. Sorry things got so crazy. I had no idea you weren't invited to the party. We missed you." The casual, "we missed you" felt like an insult. I deleted them all without replying. They were playing the same old song, but I was no longer dancing. A few days later, I met Harper for dinner. She looked at me from across the table, a knowing smile on her face. "Hawaii looks good on you," she said. "It was everything I needed," I told her. "Thank you for the article. You have no idea what that meant to me." "I had a feeling it would resonate," she said. "But you haven't heard the end of the story." She leaned forward, her smile fading into something more serious. "There's a twist." "What is it?" I asked, my stomach tightening slightly. "Savannah broke off the engagement," Harper said quietly. I stared at her, speechless. I had expected them to be angry, to maybe give me the silent treatment for a few months. I had never imagined this. "What happened?" I finally managed to ask. "The party was an absolute, unmitigated disaster," Harper explained. "Everything you predicted. The lighting failed. The food was served cold. The wrong music was played. Savannah's parents were horrified. It became this huge public embarrassment for them. But the final nail in the coffin was the article. It went so viral in Nashville that someone eventually connected the dots. People started whispering. Savannah couldn't stand the humiliation. She told Preston that the whole fiasco revealed a deep ugliness in his family that she wanted no part of. She gave him back the ring last week. I processed her words slowly. Their empire of pride, their carefully constructed image of the perfect, powerful family, had collapsed. And it wasn't because I had sought revenge. It wasn't because I had exposed them. It was because the truth had simply come to light. The foundation of their relationship was so brittle that one night of things not going according to plan was enough to shatter it completely. I waited to feel something. A surge of joy. A satisfying sense of vengeance. Guilt. But none of it came. I just felt a deep, profound, and final sense of peace. Their drama was no longer my own. Their collapse was not my victory. And it was not my fault. It was simply the natural consequence of their own choices. I was finally, truly free. In the weeks that followed, something incredible began to happen. My professional email inbox, which had been silent for 2 weeks, began to ping, and then it pinged again, and again, until it was a constant stream of new messages. The viral article, which I thought had just been a source of personal validation, had become the most powerful marketing tool I could have ever imagined. The story of the anonymous ghost planner had made its way through creative and corporate circles in Nashville and beyond. The first email was from the owner of a new luxury wedding venue. "We read the story about your experience. Your integrity and professionalism, even when describing a difficult situation, are exactly what we are looking for in an exclusive planning partner." Another came from the marketing director of a major music festival. "We are looking for a lead event producer for our VIP experiences. We need someone who is unflappable, creative, and holds their ground. We have a feeling you might be that person." A boutique wedding brand, a corporate event firm, a charity gala, they all reached out. They didn't just want to hire an event planner. They wanted to hire me. They wanted the woman from the article, the one who valued her work, and more importantly, herself. My name, Alara Bennett, was no longer just a name on a contract. It stood for something. It stood for resilience, for creativity, and for a quiet, unyielding strength. It was a brand I had built not with floral arrangements and seating charts, but with a single powerful choice: to walk away. I politely declined my parents' repeated attempts at a family meeting. I sent Preston a single short text message telling him I was sorry to hear about the engagement, but that I wished him peace. I knew that forgiveness might come one day, but reconciliation required them to change, and I couldn't build my future waiting for that. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same one where I had felt so trapped and invisible just a month ago. It felt different now. It felt like mine. I lit a candle and opened a journal I had bought in Hawaii. On the first clean white page, I wrote, "He said I didn't deserve his party. Turns out I didn't. I deserved the world." A soft breeze came through the open window, carrying the distant sound of Nashville music. For a moment, it felt like the ocean breeze, a whisper from the island that had given me back to myself. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a notification from a new client. And this time, I didn't reach for it right away. I let it wait. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. I was finally in charge of my own event, and it was called my life.